Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So, hi everyone. My name is Bria Watson. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Admission here at Berkeley Law, so thank you for joining. I am joined by two of our student ambassadors in the law school, Noah and also Shivani. They are going to be available to answer questions about the student experience. So, if you have things that you're wondering about related to that, as the info session is going on, feel free to use the Q&A function and they can answer those questions, and then we'll leave time for questions at the end. So today we are going to go over three different parts of the entire process of applying to law school. So part one is the application process. Part two is an overview of UC Berkeley Law, and then part three is tuition and financial aid. So this slide that you're seeing right now is an overview of the entire application cycle. It is pretty standard year to year, so you can bet pretty much that our application will open September 1st, and then typically we close in February. This year it was March, but we try to keep it in that same time frame. What you want to kind of be mindful of is the fact that we do rolling admissions at Berkeley Law. So that means you could apply in September and then not hear back from us until maybe sometime in December. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that we are reviewing applications in batches as they become available and ready for our review. But do keep in mind, if you are applying for this application cycle, the application will close February 17th. And if you are applying for specific scholarships that are full tuition scholarships, those have different deadlines. So you would need to get your application materials in earlier than the regular application deadline. This slide is talking about our early decision program. So this is kind of similar to the undergrad process if you applied early decision to any school. So if you get into the school where you apply early decision, you are basically locked into attending there, and you have to withdraw your applications from all of the other programs you've applied to. The benefit with this in law school is that you'll know where you're going to go for law school by mid-December. And then there are no denied applications. So if you don't get early decision, you will be rolled over into regular decision. And then there is a guaranteed scholarship with early decision. So you can get $35,000 per year for all 3 years of law school. And then you also get earlier access to the housing list, which is pretty important in the Bay Area. And the application deadline for this one is November 15th, and you will know whether or not you have it by December 15th. So now we'll go over the application components. So we have the standardized tests, the academic record, personal statement and addenda, your resume, and letters of recommendation. These are also pretty similar to what you may have had to do or prepare when you were applying for college. So when we get your application, the admissions committee is really asking ourselves three questions. First, can you do the work? So we're looking at your transcript and then also your test scores, which is the LSAT or the GRE. Then we ask ourselves, what will you contribute to the campus, to the conversations that are happening in classes, to the legal profession, and we look at your personal statement and then also your resume. And are you someone we need and want in our community? That's when we rely on the letters of recommendation. What do others say about you? How have you contributed in the past? So first, the standardized test. As I said, we accept the LSAT or the GRE. A writing sample is required, so make sure when you sign up for your test, you do have that component included. And we will look at your highest score, but do keep in mind that we can see all of your attempts. So any other test scores that you have for those tests, we can see those. If you would rather we not be able to see them, you have to go and cancel those scores. It's not always a bad thing to have multiple test attempts. It's pretty standard at this point that most people are taking the test at least 2 or 3 times. And if you are improving as you are retesting, that's great. If you go down for some reason, you can always use an addendum to explain what might have happened. But if you don't want us to see a test score, just remember to cancel it. And then also we will accept the GMAT in limited circumstances. So that's typically when you're applying to law school and business school at the same time. And so you would need to email the admissions office so that way we can waive the LSAT requirement and use your GMAT test score. We also have listed the upcoming LSAT administrations. Keep in mind the registration dates. And then if you do need to retest after you have already submitted your application, do email us so that way we know to hold your review until we get your new test score. When we look at your academic record, so that means submitting all of your transcripts from every place where you received credit after high school. So that could be study abroad opportunities, any sort of, I don't know, summer classes that you might have taken, or if you went to community college, any transcript, you need to submit all of those to LSAC, and LSAC will calculate a cumulative GPA based on all of those transcripts for us to see. But we do also get every transcript that you submit, so we'll see your graduating GPA as well. When we look at the transcripts, we're thinking about the rigor of your courses, the workload, the grade trends, and then also the number of pass, no pass grades that you've taken. Really, pass, no pass grades only becomes somewhat of a flag for us if you've taken quite a number that are in the courses required for your major. If you happen to have done that or are doing that, just feel free to use an addendum to explain the situation so that way we can understand the context. Then we look at your personal statement. So standard is 2 pages for most law schools. However, at Berkeley Law, we will accept up to 4 pages. Just make sure you follow the instructions for each school that you're applying to and you tailor your personal statement for that specific school. Also, for Berkeley Law, we do not have a specific prompt, so that means you can tell us about anything that you want us to know about you. What we do suggest is that you consider addressing your perspective and experiences, your interest in the legal profession, and also your interest in UC Berkeley Law. You are not required to talk about any of those 3 things, but we do find that it's helpful to guide applicants as they prepare their personal statement. Then we have optional and required addenda. So there's an academic potential addendum. You can use this one if, say, you've had a history of poor standardized test taking, but then in college you still perform very well. If you want us to understand that discrepancy, go ahead and submit that addendum. We also will take short answer questions, so you get to choose 2 of those from our application out of 10. It's not required. However, I would suggest that you do use those opportunities to tell us more about you. And then there's the character and fitness addendum. So if you answer yes to any of the required questions in the application, you need to tell us what was the context for that situation. So this can range anywhere from having a candle in your dorm room and you got written up for that, all the way up to being arrested or having served time in prison. This is just preparation and being transparent for when you have to go through the background check once you prepare to get your license. And then we also have scholarship essays. So we have 2 full tuition scholarship essays that are really important to consider if you are wondering about what financial aid will look like. So the Opportunity Scholars, that is for people who are first gen to college or first gen to law school. And the Public Interest Scholarship is for people who are dedicated to working in public interest after they graduate. Both of those applications are due by December 15th, so keep that in mind. And then we have the Hyundai Kia Scholarship. That's for people who are interested in IP and tech, specifically in the automotive industry. That deadline is the same as the regular application deadline. Then there's the resume. So there is no page limit for your resume, but usually it's 1 to 2 pages. I would say try not to go over 2 pages, but if you have to, that's okay. Just make sure your formatting is the same for all of the pages. It's not a CV, but you can include research and publications, and you want to include everything after high school. I would say remove anything that is from high school on your resume at this point. We want to see your work experience, leadership, volunteer positions, and internships or externships since you've been in college. And don't assume that we know acronyms, so go ahead and spell everything out for us. And it's also useful to include the dates, the hours worked, and the duties that you were assigned. This slide is an example of what the resume should look like in terms of formatting. It's pretty standard. You can always just search for what a resume can look like or use, AI or something like that. But as far as what each school is requiring, I would say maybe pay attention again to what their instructions are. And if they have certain limits as like 1 page as opposed to 2, do change your resume to fit those requirements. And this is an example of the extracurriculars, same kind of formatting. Everything should look clear, the spacing, all of that. Then we have letters of recommendation. So at Berkeley Law, we will accept up to 4 letters of recommendation, and 2 of those should be academic letters. Academic sources could be professors, teaching assistants, graduate student instructors, or thesis advisors. So that's really anybody who got to see and judge your work product while you were in college. You can also use people who you volunteered for or people who you worked for outside of a school setting for your additional letters of recommendation, though it's not required. And then if you are using professional sources, it should come from a direct supervisor. But if, say, you don't want to apply to law school right after you graduate college, that's perfectly fine. But if it gets to be 5 or more years, that's when we will rely primarily on your professional recommendations and you won't be required to submit academic letters. As far as asking for these recommendations, we suggest that you give your recommenders at least a month's notice, and then also let them know, information about what you are looking to kind of make your narrative in terms of your application for law school, the stories you would like for them to tell about you, or things that they can reflect on, so that way we can see that they know you both professionally and personally. And then keep in mind that the recommenders will send their letters to LSAC, not to the schools directly. And now we'll talk about Berkeley Law. So this slide is a breakdown of our class profile for this year. We typically get about 7,000 applications each year, and this year we admitted 374 students for the 1L class. Typically, we keep it at 350 students, and that is our goal for this application cycle. What has changed is our median GPA. We are now at a 3.92, and the median LSAT is a 170. Do not get scared by the numbers. If you do not hit those numbers exactly, it does not mean that you can't get in. What you need to do instead is kind of carry extra weight in the other areas of your application, so that way you can balance out how you are reviewed. So it's not impossible. People can get in with the 3.6, people can get in with a 160. You just have to have a pretty strong application to still be competitive. And then when we look at the curriculum, the first year is pretty much standard at any law school. You're going to take civil procedure, contracts, criminal law, legal research and writing, torts, written and oral advocacy, and then you also get up to 2 electives in the spring at Berkeley Law. What happens for some schools is that they'll also require you to take property maybe in your first year. So none of these classes you get to pick yourself. You'll already get sent with a set schedule when you show up as a first-year law student. So that's just your first year. And then for that 350 students that we typically admit, we break those students down into mods. And so that's typically about 30 students per mod. And that helps us keep the student-faculty ratio fairly low. And then what people don't know sometimes about Berkeley Law is that we don't do a traditional grading structure. What we do instead is passing, honors, and high honors. So there is no class rank and there is no GPA. However, if a GPA is required, so say you're doing like a judicial clerkship or something like that, you can still calculate a GPA. And then we also offer certificates and combined degrees. So certificates are a way for you to, in a sense, major in something in law school. What typically happens is everyone graduates with the same degree and there is no specialization, but a certificate is a way for you to kind of specialize in a specific area of law. So if you take so many classes within the area and you have a certain grade in those classes, you'll get the certificate along with your diploma when you graduate. As far as the combined degrees, typically you would need to apply to both of those programs at the same time. However, for some, you can apply after your first year of law school or while you're a current law student. The most popular are the JD MBA and then the JD in Masters of Public Policy. If you are considering a combined degree, just keep in mind that it is likely going to be a minimum of 4 years for you. You are technically shortening each experience in the law school and then also your other program, but it will still calculate to be a longer time that you are in school. And then generally public service and public interest is pretty big at Berkeley Law. So we are public mission oriented. We offer a variety of summer public interest grants, public interest fellowships, bridge fellowships, and also loan repayment assistance. You should be keeping those things in mind, particularly if you are having to borrow money in order to attend law school. And then our students typically do a lot of pro bono work, and we look to admit students who are interested in being involved in that way and like to give back. Some other first year opportunities are the journals. We have blast trips and then also student-led service projects. The most popular journal that you've probably heard of is the California Law Review. You have to write on for the Law Review in order to join that one. And that typically happens in the summer after your first year. So they will be testing you on your blue booking skills, which is the citation system that you are using in law school and then also as a lawyer. The other journals you can typically join without having to do that same write-on process, but they might have other joining requirements. The blast trips are typically more intense service projects that happen over a shorter time period, so perhaps a fall break or a spring break. They sometimes are out of state, and so you get to travel for those. And then the student-led service projects are projects that the students themselves propose. So if you come up with an idea on something that you want to work out, you can bring it to the school and see if they can make it a project for other students to get involved with as well. And then we have clinics. So clinics are different because clinics count for credit, and that credit is counted towards your degree. We have listed here some of the popular clinics on campus. What you need to keep in mind is that for most of the clinics on campus, you have to apply for them. So that means that you may not get the clinic in the semester that you're desiring, but you will likely participate in the clinic before you graduate. And another thing about Berkeley Law is that first year students can participate in clinics if they are admitted through the application process, and you would technically be participating in the spring of your first year. The East Bay Community Law Center also encompasses a variety of other clinics that work on issues in the East Bay, which is where UC Berkeley is located. Some other student opportunities that we have are research institutes and centers. So if you are concerned about doing research, you want to work with professors more, or you just like a certain area of law, you can volunteer and work in that way, and it won't count towards your degree. You can also do field placement programs. So we have the UCDC, we have the INHR in Geneva, and also you can do judicial externships. We also have lots of student organizations. There's always meetings happening, lots of lunch talks that happen on campus. So you won't be looking for things to do. You'll always have something to do. And then we have advocacy competitions, so trial team, moot court, and also ADR and negotiation. So if you are involved in that in high school or in college, you could continue with that. And they do travel sometimes for their competitions. Now, this slide is a breakdown of our employment report from 2023. So if you are looking for 2024, you can very likely find it on our website if you just search for it. But what you want to pay attention to is the bar pass rate at any law school that you are applying to. So for us, we typically are about 90% is what our bar pass rate is. And then we look at employment 9 months out, and that's typically around 94%. And then our median salary is $215,000. That's coming out of law school. So typically that is based on people who are going into big law. And now we'll talk about tuition and financial aid. So what you'll see here is that there is a difference between a California resident and a non-resident's tuition. That is going to be pretty standard at any state school or just any school really, unless it's a private school in terms of the difference between the cost. So it's roughly about $20,000 difference. I would say keep in mind that in California, you can qualify for residency 1 year after, going to law school. So by your second year, you could become a California resident, and then you'll be required to pay the tuition of a California resident instead of non-resident. You don't have to do that, but that's just something you could keep in mind if you are worried about cost. And then as far as living expenses go, they calculate that to be about the same just because it is relatively expensive to live in the Bay Area, but there are ways to lower your cost in terms of having roommates if you live on campus, and then also just like food options and things like that. Like you can keep your costs lower and it doesn't have to exactly match the numbers that we have posted here. And then we have award types. So when you get your financial aid award, you'll see something that says a Dean's Fellowship, a Center Scholars Award, or a full tuition and fees scholarship. There are a variety of scholarships that you could see come, and you do need to apply for scholarships. I did mention the full tuition ones, the public interest scholars, the Berkeley Law Opportunity Scholars, but we also have the Native American Opportunity Program. So if you are registered with a tribe, you should apply for that scholarship and you may get that one. We also have the Binding Early Decision Program, which I talked about. So you get $35,000 per year. And then there's the Military Promise Program. So that's $10,000 per year. The Hyundai Kia Scholarship is also $10,000 per year. And then we do have continuing student scholarships. If you don't get as much as you are hoping for in your first year, you can still apply for additional scholarships in your second and your third year. And then we have named awards. So we announced these last year. These are from donors who are interested in supplementing the cost of law school for students in certain areas of law, or if they have an interest in that area. So say you like environmental law or you want to go into litigation or anything like that, we would have to flag you as an admissions officer for that specific scholarship because you can't apply for it by writing an essay. So we would need to see in your application a dedicated interest or something that's related to any of the named scholarships, and then we could flag you for it. So I would say, again, err on the side of transparency and telling us as much about you as possible so that way we can know when to flag you for things that you otherwise wouldn't know are available. And now I will take questions. So I see we have some questions in the chat and then also in the Q&A. So let me see. I will go ahead and I'll start with the Q&A and then I'll come to the chat. And if you have questions, you want to raise your hand or something like that, I will go ahead and answer those too. If you have questions specifically for the students, I'll let Noah and Shivani answer those questions. So the first one, can one apply early decision to the JD MBA? So you could apply early decision. I would say you would need to apply to both programs at the same time. You would technically need to be admitted into both. If you get early decision with the JD program, it just means that you are limiting your scholarship that you'll get from the law school. So you could still get scholarships from the business school, but from the law school itself, you'll only be getting the 35,000 and you'll know where you're going to attend earlier. I'd say if you're a really strong applicant, you likely will want to apply for the full tuition scholarships just because you could be leaving money on the table, but it is possible to do that. You won't necessarily be applying early decision to the MBA. The early decision is just the time frame for when you submit your law school application. So still submit the MBA application according to their deadlines. And then could you speak more about the work students can do in the Center on Reproductive Rights and Justice? Noah or Shivani, do you know any more about that?
I don't know about that
Okay.
program specifically. Noah, if you've got anything, let us know.
No, I haven't worked with that center or done like that with any center, but I would say in general, I think centers hold like events. They'll like bring speakers to campus and you can attend their talks during lunch and kind of chat with them. You can work with the scholars at the center, helping with research, kind of whatever work they're doing. I think they are happy to talk to students about and you can maybe jump into.
Yeah, and you can also there are more of us than the two, like Noah and I. So if you just like a general plug, if you look up student ambassadors Berkeley Law into Google, a whole bunch of us with our bios will pop up, and there may be someone that has more experience with that center in particular, or other centers that might be able to speak on it. And you can also reach out directly to folks at the center. I think especially when you're making your decisions or writing personal statements, it never hurts to know more information about the things that are interesting to you. So definitely recommend.
And then I see one question in the chat is, which is preferred, LSAT or GRE? We honestly don't have a preference. The LSAT is the test that was created for law schools, just like the GMAT is the test for business schools. But if the law school says they'll accept the GRE, go ahead and take the GRE if you think that you're going to perform better in it. I would say if you want the school to only look at your GRE score, but you've also taken the LSAT, you might need to cancel your LSAT score or just let the school know through an addendum that you would prefer that they look at your GRE score only. Because when you take the LSAT, the law schools immediately get to see that test score. And then, yes, Daniela, you have a question.
Hi, sorry, excuse any background noise, but thank you again for doing this. I feel like this is very helpful to just have these webinars. But my question is, so you mentioned with the scholarship essays that we do we have to have those submitted at the same time that we would be submitting the application?
It's in your best interest to go ahead and submit it at the same time, so that way the person can read everything for your application, because what happens is we review you for admissions first, and then we review you for the specific scholarships, particularly the full tuition scholarships. There's a separate committee for those. So even though there's the deadline of December 15th, that just means that you need to have like everything done by December 15th. So I would say make sure you get it in by that date if you are applying for those scholarships.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. And then let's see. So I see, what kind of information do you usually expect to hear about in the academic potential addendum? So for that, so say you want to provide an example of how you tested for college. So you have your SAT or your ACT score. You can provide us with a copy of that, and then we'll also be able to see your LSAT or your GRE scores, and you can go ahead and explain, the history of your test taking, what typically happens, but then maybe make a reference to how you've performed in college, and that's not necessarily a reflection of your academic potential. And then, does Berkeley Law prefer resumes to have more comprehensive context, additional information as to the workplaces and kind of work done, or simply succinct and to the point? How much of extracurricular activities do you prefer to have listed? So I would say you want to be concise, just because you are very likely using bullet points, so you won't have a lot of space, especially if you're only aiming for 1 to 2 pages. If something does need to be explained a bit more, I would say maybe do that in an addendum and just label that it's a resume addendum. But beyond that, how much extracurricular activities do you prefer? We don't really prefer that you have anything. Honestly, you don't have to have anything related to law school in order to get into law school. So if you don't have that, that's fine. I think what we're looking at more is your commitment to whatever activities that you've been involved in. So if you grew within an organization, if you were in a fraternity or sorority and you eventually became treasurer or president, like seeing those kind of things matter. So you're considering impact and then also just commitment. So 6 months or longer is always great to see. But if you have a lot of 1 month commitments, that's not something that necessarily you should include unless it's just an ongoing interest that you have. And then let's see. Q&A. Are there any opportunities to explore real estate law? Yes, there are. I believe that we do offer a certificate for that as well. But Noah or Shivani, do you know anything more about that?
I was gonna say, I think there is a certificate. Also, I just checked our course catalog and we have several real estate classes as well, specific classes and classes that'll help get a baseline knowledge for pretty much any area of law, is what my second point was gonna say in the chat, is just Berkeley has a ton of professors that do all different types of things. The student body is so diverse in their interests, as well as our career development officers, of like helpers that will be very helpful in that. And they have like a broad scope of knowledge and they can get you connected, get you internships and help you achieve that. So definitely a great place for real estate as well. I know like 4 people that are going into real estate law. And that's just my circle. So
Okay, and then I see, are there any opportunities that will help secure guaranteed on-campus housing? Do many JD candidates live on campus? As far as securing on-campus housing, The best bet is to apply early, honestly. The application typically opens in February, or sometime in March. So if you know that you're admitted already, you'll have immediate access to go ahead and apply that way. Grad students are not guaranteed housing on UC Berkeley's campus and pretty much like most of the UCs because we are in a housing crisis. However, we are continuing to build more housing for our grad students and students in general. But yeah, that's your best bet. I will also add that if you are a student coming with a family, so say you have children or you have a partner, there is grad family housing, and typically they do get priority. There's a different process that you would have to go through in terms of providing like marriage certificates, birth certificates, things like that. But that is also an available option. And then how many live on campus? I don't know for sure, but I do know that we have students who live in Berkeley, who live on campus. Some people live like maybe 5 to 10 minutes away. A lot of students have roommates, but it depends on your preference and how you want to live. It's going to be cheaper to live with more people. But you do have options in terms of living in a large apartment complex if you want to rent out a room in a house, or if you want to rent a house with a couple other people. At our admitted students weekend, that's your best chance to meet other students who likely are going to come to Berkeley Law, and you can kind of figure out a roommate situation then. But yeah, it just depends on you specifically, where you want to live and how you want to live. And then let's see, what is the typical schedule for a 1L student Monday to Friday? I know you mentioned pods. Are they usually scheduled together? It's my understanding that yes, the mods do move through their classes together. That is not the case that like it carries on through your second and your third year. It's primarily for your first year. But Noah or Shivani, do you have any more reflection on that?
Yeah, I feel like the like pod system is just really helpful for first year students because you're in all the same classes with the same people. I would say it's usually Monday through Friday. You have class every single day, which is usually like a slightly lighter Friday, but it might depend. And I think it just really fully immerses you, fully throws you in, but sets you up well to have support from your peers academically and socially.
Okay, and then what are the benefits of being at a law school on the semester system versus a place like Stanford? And I see Noah, you answered that. As far as the benefits that go with that, I wouldn't say that it necessarily like matters, but it may impact, the timing for your breaks and things like that. So if that really matters to you, you could consider it. But honestly, I wouldn't pick the law school based on the semester system or the quarter system or anything like that. Primarily what you should be focusing on is the culture of the school, what they offer, for academics, and then their placements, what happens after students graduate. But if you do get a chance to visit the law school, do that. Pay attention to how the reps talk to you. If you go to any of the big law school expos or anything like that, do they have time for you? Are they treating you like just another number? Do you want to be in a hyper competitive environment? You should kind of get to know that about yourself and then apply to the schools that fit that environment. And then let's see. Does Berkeley Law currently have any formal mechanisms or precedents for students pursuing concurrent degrees in the College of Engineering? I am already enrolled in the other program. Can I still apply? So if we don't have it listed on our website as a current combined degree that we offer, it means we don't offer it currently. So what would happen is that if you apply to the law school, you would be essentially starting in the law school after you finish the engineering program, if that's your specific program you're involved in. So you technically could still do it, but depending on how many years left you have, you might be looking to defer your admission. And typically, we only defer for 1 year. There are special circumstances in which we can defer for 2 years, but that is limited. And at that point, you might be putting your scholarships at risk if you were awarded any of those, because we try to guarantee that we'll keep them for the first year of deferment. But beyond that, it just depends on how the application cycle and admission is going that specific year. All right, and then which GPA is considered in the application process, undergrad or graduate or both? We do look at both. I think that they only factor the cumulative GPAs for the undergrad. The graduate side won't be calculated in that, but we do look at your transcripts line by line. So we'll be able to see if you had maybe an off, semester in the spring of your sophomore year or something like that, or if there was a whole year where things were kind of low and then you improved, or you were doing good and then things declined. Any kind of situations like those, definitely use an addendum to let us know what was going on, so that way we can kind of understand the context. However much you choose to share is up to you, but give us enough information so we kind of know what to think and we're not making up what could have potentially happened. And then for your graduate degree, yeah, we're going to look at that transcript. We are definitely going to want to see that you have been performing well, because you're already have done a graduate program and now you're pursuing another. And so that is a more recent reflection of your academic performance. So those will matter. And then I heard that ED tends to be more competitive at Berkeley due to the scholarship. If you don't get in for ED and get pushed back to RD, would there be any disadvantage compared to the regular applicants for RD? No, I don't think there's any disadvantage. I think what could be a disadvantage is if you don't do the other scholarships. So if you don't get ED and you were thinking about that 35,000, you could be getting a full tuition scholarship or some other named award or something like that. But if you don't do scholarships, or you don't let us know, that you're interested in other things, you could get in, but then you still have to think about the financial component of things. So there's not really a disadvantage, but it just depends on your specific situation and your application. And then, how many applications do we typically receive for ED, and how many acceptances are given among them? We don't have specific numbers on that we share out. I would say that early decision is not as popular as the regular decision application, just because some people don't want to be locked in. They like to be able to compare their options, and that comes up particularly in the case of reconsideration, which happens when you have multiple offers from different law schools. So you can try to negotiate for a better offer from a specific school, or the school that's like your top choice. I would say that's the benefit of applying regular decision, because with early decision, you very likely are not going to get awarded more scholarships from the school, other than the 35,000 that comes with the early decision application. Okay, let's see. What companies usually come during OCIs? Noah, Shivani?
It ranges very much. I would say that it used to be the summer OCI that was kind of the big law specific OCI, but I believe that that's kind of moving to 1L's like spring, maybe winter. But in addition to the kind of big law traditional OCI, we also have public interest organizations like nonprofits from the Bay Area that will come to OCI, and also some governments. So there will be usually maybe like US DOJ might be included. Some California like Attorney General's office is a really big employer for us, and then like county and city level government positions as well.
Yeah, I would say the only sector I can think of that doesn't go through the traditional OCI route is in-house opportunities, and that's just because that is so skewed. They also don't tend to hire straight out of law school, so you can do in-house something like, say, your 1L summer. That's the summer following your first year of law school. But so it's a good opportunity. Those don't typically go in OCI because they don't follow up with full-time offers afterwards, since they'd like to see a little bit of experience before they let you become in-house counsel. But I think everything else, Berkeley does a great job of putting on either fairs for, or a more traditional OCI interviewing setting for.
Yeah, and it is good to add on to what Noah was mentioning. They are seeing a trend change in terms of recruiting for your 1L summer job and your 2L summer job. That is being shifted earlier. So as soon as you get to campus as a 1L student, essentially that first semester of grades is going to determine your 1L summer job and also your 2L summer job. So it's a bit more intense in terms of having to manage not just your grades, but also two recruiting jobs that you need to look for. We don't know if that will continue to be the case. So if you're not applying, for this coming cycle, things might change. But we also don't really know what that looks like for the students because our 1Ls are going to be the first ones kind of going through this experience. And we are learning what is happening just as they are. So our career development office is doing a good job of trying to prepare students for what this experience will be like, trying to make sure that they get connected and they meet with certain firms. And so they have coffee chats and things like that that are happening consistently on campus. But yes, keep in mind that that is kind of shifting when you need to start thinking about your 1L summer job. So I'd say if you're applying this coming cycle, maybe start looking at what's available, like what people are doing, what do they think of certain areas of law, just so you kind of have a bit more of an idea and you're not really just like thrown into the pot, when it's already starting to boil. And then I see a question. Is there anything in particular that would set apart an ED admit from an RD? Not really. I would say the thing that really sets the applicants apart is the timing for when they apply. So we do tend to see the strongest applicants apply early in the cycle. And what we consider early is any time between September and December. So that would include the ED applicants because their application is due in November. But we do also see people who are regular decision applicants apply by November as well. And so sometimes people even are admitted by November because they applied immediately in September. This year we had 50 applications like the week that our application opened. So we know that people are understanding that applying early is important, but I would say not everyone can do that because just of your personal circumstances, if you need to take the test for the LSAT or the GRE, or you need to retest, there are situations where you would need to apply later, and that's okay. But do keep in mind that we get the most applications in December and January. So as we approach the application deadline, they start to flood in. And at that point, we have started to build the class out because we do rolling admissions. So you need to really be a strong applicant in that period of December and January to stand out. Because at that point, most people do have somewhat of like a 165 or a 170 on the LSAT, or most people do have 3.9s or 3.8s. And so that what kind of distinguishes you. So pay attention to what you're telling us in your personal statements and definitely do the additional optional essays and then use addendums so we can kind of know what's going on. Let's see. Okay. Yep, yep. Is there a preference on the faculty writing letters of recs, undergrad versus grad? No, not really. I would say that what matters most is if the person knows you. So if they can talk about your character, they can tell a personal story about you, that's great. I have seen personal statements, or not personal statements, letters of recommendation that are literally like one sentence or one paragraph. And that's really disappointing for us to see, but I also feel for the applicant who requested a letter from someone who just didn't know anything about them or didn't really have the care to write a bit more or expand. So be careful about who you ask for a letter of recommendation. You do have to kind of check a box or something saying that you won't look at the recommendation before it's submitted. Sometimes people don't check that box because they do want to see it. I would say if you're doing that, use an addendum to let us know. So that way it doesn't seem like you're the one who's writing your own recommendation. But yeah, I would say the name, we've had people who are like senators, and things like that. If they don't really know you, don't use them. Like the name is not that impressive. What matters, again, specifically for us, is who you are as a person because we're trying to build community at Berkeley Law. Let's see. Okay, what percentage of accepted students receive scholarships in both early decision and regular decision? I don't know the specifics. I would say that most of our students are getting some form of a scholarship. However, that can range in terms of the amount of that award. So some people might only get 10,000, but some people are getting full tuition. So most people are getting something, but that something is very likely different in terms of if it's enough to cover your full costs. And especially if you are someone who is relying on scholarships and also loans in order to pay for law school. Sometimes people who only get 10,000, that's okay because they can also personally fund the rest of their costs. So that's not everyone's situation, but definitely keep those things in mind. And that's why I'm telling you to apply for every scholarship that you see that's out there, because the changes that they've made recently with the Grad Plus loan being eliminated means that there are caps on the amount that you can borrow from the federal government. So you might need to consider borrowing from private student loans, and then you would have to consider your credit score. And then there are cases where sometimes people know that they have their first year covered, but what about the second and third year? Or they only have a semester covered, and do they need to withdraw? Do they need to defer? There's going to be a lot more planning that's needed in terms of figuring out the financial side of law school at this point in most grad programs. Also, okay, just a clarification, every ED admit gets 35 per year. Yes, that is correct. All right, let's see. Okay. All right, are applicants with a lower GPA, but more years of work experience and volunteer experience still competitive? Are there many students who are over the age of 30 or older? So I would say if you have a lower GPA, you definitely need to boost your application in every other area that you can. So you can't change your GPA after you've graduated, but depending on the type of work that you do, you can show that you can do the work through the work that you're doing. If you have a direct supervisor who can comment on that, that's great. If there were times where you did well in certain classes, I would use an addendum to show that and kind of make the link between how those skills that you have, I don't know, like relate well to the skill set that you'll need in law school. So you'll have to get kind of creative if you are concerned about being, I think, what they call a splitter. And then as far as the number of students who are 30 years and older, our average age is 25, but we do range from 20, I think, to 49. And I think we even have like a 50 or a 60-year-old student in our 1L class this year. So it honestly depends. I would say, yes, there are a lot of people who are applying to law school and going immediately after college. And that's just because with law school, you can do that. But there are plenty of resources available for older students or people who are non-traditional. And that is to your benefit because you will likely be coming into law school a bit more mature and kind of knowing what you want out of life and out of the legal profession in general. And that typically shows a bit more in your application and your personal statements, the stories that you're telling us. And I think that's useful. So I wouldn't count yourself out in any way because of that. But definitely, if you feel like there's something that's lacking in an area of your application, do your best to buffer it in some other way. Okay. And then just to clarify, did you say that an applicant would be less likely to get other scholarships if they got the ED scholarship? Yes, I did. That is because the ED scholarship is guaranteed, so you will get $35,000 from the school. And that's why you could be leaving money on the table if you are a very strong applicant. But sometimes people are not concerned about that because they know that Berkeley is their number one choice or some other law school is the number one choice. And that's why they're applying early decision because they just want to know that they're in and they're ready to go. But again, if you are more financially concerned about how you're going to pay for grad school, then you will need to consider maybe writing the additional scholarship essays, applying for ED, and then in the case that you don't get ED, you get rolled over to regular decision, but then you also can be reviewed for the extra scholarships. So you kind of have to be strategic in that way. Yes. And yeah, as Shivani said, scholarship reconsideration exists. So even if initially you don't get as much money as you need or as you would like, don't just drop the school because you can negotiate. That is when the quality of your application really matters. Because if you are someone that we want, we very likely could be willing to offer you something else in order for you to come to Berkeley Law. Are you considered for the merit scholarships based on your stats or application automatically, even if you don't apply to any of the named scholarships? Yes, so you are considered for merit scholarships automatically just based on your application. And then even still with the named scholarships, you don't need to write an essay for those. We'll just flag them if we see something in your application that aligns with the criteria for that scholarship. If someone is considering a PhD in another field of study, would you recommend they pursue the other degree before law school or the JD before the PhD? It depends. I know that we see applications typically from PhD students, not from students who get a law degree and then go and get a PhD specifically in another area, but that's kind of your choice. I don't know, it depends on what you want to do, really. I know like a PhD program is a big commitment, and so that can kind of stretch out in terms of years that you're in school. So if, say, you want to be able to work as a lawyer while you're still also doing whatever for your PhD and your dissertation and things like that, you could potentially do something like that, but it varies, I guess, based on what your goal is. And I think if you allude to that in your application. So say you are applying for the JD right now and you mentioned that eventually you want to apply to the PhD, you need to really have that flushed out in terms of how you tell that story to us, because we won't necessarily get it right off the bat. So you can do it, but it just depends on how you tell the story and, what your circumstances are. And then are GPA and LSAT score valued equally for scholarship consideration? Yes. So they look at both of those numbers for merit scholarships. And yes, there is not like I don't think we have a way that we're combining it, but it might be the case that somehow there's something in our system or someone who's like on the back end of the application process who knows how to combine those so that there's a number that they look at. But I don't honestly know that. I just think that what happens as far as scholarships go, the admissions reps, they get to flag you for a specific scholarship. And so it's essentially like we're recommending, but the person who makes the final decision is our dean. So they're looking at every application. So not like every application is getting more than one review, essentially. And Diamond, yes, go ahead. What's your question?
Thank you all so much for having this session, especially answering a lot of the questions that I had. My question is more geared towards the concurrent degrees. So I know that there's the JD GASP, but there's also the JD MBA. If a student was interested in, the three of those programs, is there a limit to, like, if they applied definitely for the JD, they submit for the JSP, and they also submit for the MBA? Is that allowed, or does an applicant have to choose between the MBA or the PhD?
So that I don't know specifically. I think there might be a limit from the UC system itself on how many grad programs you can apply for, but I would check with them specifically. Does that help? Okay. Let's see. There was another question. Oh, what is the last LSAT date accepted for the regular decision applicants? Yes, I was looking for that. I want to say that it is, I kind of want to say it's like November, but it might be January. I don't know for sure. Okay, yes, let's see. The last score we will accept for fall 2026 admission is the January 2025 LSAT. So the last one for the early decision application, that one is November 2025 LSAT. All right. Do you look for any specific factors additionally for the international students application, those without US GPAs, and how would you regard it if they express the interest to work outside of the US after graduation in their application. So we don't look for anything different for international applicants. You are reviewed the same. And also, as far as your GPA goes, that gets sent to LSAC, and LSAC is the one who deals with making the equivalencies and giving us a cumulative GPA. So they give us the equivalent of what your GPA from, for example, Canada is in a US school system. So they'll handle that side. And then as far as you wanting to go and work abroad, that's perfectly fine. We have students who plan on doing that. There is no requirement that because you get your degree in the US that you have to stay in the US. Just like because you get your degree in California, it doesn't mean that you have to practice in California. We do have students who go and practice on the East Coast. Some people go to the Midwest. It just depends in terms of how you prepare for that bar exam. So there are differences in terms of the moral character application and things like that. So that's called different things in different states. Sometimes you might need to do additional like volunteer or pro bono hours or something like that. So you would just need to know what the requirements are for the state that you want to practice in, and then also the country after you graduate. And then let's see. When applying to the JD PhD, should you reference why you want to do the degrees jointly in the personal statement? You can. I would say you don't have to because both applications are reviewed by the separate schools. But if it is very, I don't know, like if it's necessary for why you are doing grad school in general, go ahead and tell us. That's okay. We won't get to make the decision about whether or not you get into the other school, but if it helps us understand why you're applying to law school and kind of give context to your application, you're more than welcome to do that. We won't look down upon that. All right. Any other questions? Okay, so this session is being recorded, so we will have it posted with captions, I believe, on our YouTube, and we are also submitting it to the graduate division who put this whole event together. So yeah, if you have more questions for us at UC Berkeley Law specifically, definitely email us. You can also email the student ambassadors. Their profiles and information is on the website. They do office hours as well. We have drop-in office hours to help you as you're going through the process with your application. There are also other ways to engage with us virtually. We do have in-person visits available. There might still be some opportunities available for November if you are in the area and you want to come in, get a tour, talk to the students, hear more from the reps. You can do that. But yeah, good luck to everyone and don't stress out. It's possible. You'll get in somewhere very likely. I hope it's the place that you want to be. And if it is not, transferring is an option. We do have transfers for law school, so you can consider that route as well. But definitely plan things out and consider the financial side of things. Like that's a big part now. All right. Well, take care. Bye, everybody.